Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving back into some entitled people stories. Today's tales are about justice served in the most satisfying ways. In one, a grandmother's will leaves everything to her grandson after he's mistreated by his dad and stepfamily. In another, a college grad uses Roman numerals to outsmart a bullying warehouse boss. And in the last, a shady mechanic's scheme to steal a vintage truck backfires spectacularly. At the end, we'll decide who won the ultimate showdown, and you can vote for the most satisfying story in the comments. My grandma disinherited my dad and left me everything. Now he and my stepfamily are demanding I split it because family deserves equal shares. My grandma died in 2024. I, 23-year-old male, had lived with her since I was 17. I'd taken over a lot of bills and stuff in the last year before grandma died, and it was sudden. I was also no contact with my dad and stepfamily. Grandma was no contact with them too. For background on why and how we got here, my mom left when I was only a few months old. She changed her mind about having me and left me with my grandparents, meaning my dad's parents. My dad was in the military at the time, and he retired after that deployment and took me home with him. Then my grandpa died a year later, so I don't remember him. My grandma continued helping out my dad. When I was 5, my dad told me he'd met someone and she had kids a little bit older than me and they wanted us to be a family. He got me really excited to have a mom and siblings. I don't even remember all the lead-up stuff, but the first time I was meeting them, I remember my dad saying our family was growing that day. And the first time we met went okay, but it was downhill after that. The second time we met my step-siblings, who weren't step-siblings at the time, ignored me, and when me or my dad were mentioned, they had tantrums. We moved in together after that, so we'd met twice and suddenly all lived together. Then the wedding took place a month later. It was very low-key with hardly anyone there, but I remember my 2 oldest step-siblings pushed me to the floor because the 5 of us were supposed to be getting ready in the same room and waiting for the parents. But my step-siblings didn't want me with them. What happened at the wedding wasn't an isolated incident, and they bullied and abused me a lot. My dad and stepmom did nothing to stop it. They'd tell me it was hard for my step-siblings, and they had lost their dad, and sometimes it made them a little angry, but they would never hurt me intentionally. Except they did, both physically and emotionally. My dad and stepmom started getting annoyed with me because I'd go crying to them about it. My grandma stepped in multiple times and tried to talk sense into my parents, and especially to Dad. He told her he had met the love of his life and wouldn't end the marriage for anyone. She pointed out that I needed him and had no one else. He said that was bullcrap and I had a mom now. Grandma said I would never in equal to or before the older kids who were my stepmom's bio kids. Dad said that's just how it works. Grandma said not with him apparently, which Dad resented. Grandma tried to take me more to make up for it, but my dad and stepmom protested and refused to allow it because it meant excluding my step-siblings. Meanwhile, my step-siblings would tell me if I couldn't live with Grandma, it was sad my mom didn't get rid of me before she left Dad. My grandma actually called CPS on my stepfamily, and that didn't actually result in being no contact, which still surprises me. Nothing was done by CPS, despite them saying my dad and stepmom needed parenting classes and warning if I keep getting hurt, I'd be removed. They made the threat, but didn't follow through. Then came a day where we were all at Grandma's house. I was 11 at the time, and my step-siblings would have been 13, 14, 16, and 17, and one of them shoved me really hard because I wanted to sit in the only free chair, and it was next to them. Grandma went off on them, which set my stepmom off. Then Dad defended his wife and stepkids, and it all came to a stop because Grandma called my step-siblings little monsters who shouldn't be allowed around other kids because they liked beating them up. Grandma refused to apologize, and as my dad and stepmom were forcing us all to leave, which meant forcing me to leave, Grandma said they were all monsters, and she told Dad he was not coming back from that moment. This is the moment she drew a line in the sand. She saw them for what they were, a group that would always sacrifice you for their own comfort, and she refused to pretend otherwise. Her choice of words wasn't just anger, it was a public, permanent judgment. She named them, and in doing so, gave you the vocabulary for your own reality years later. My dad and stepmom stopped me from seeing Grandma for years. I only got back in touch with her a week before I moved out. They called the police and tried to drag me back and accused my grandma of abusing my step-siblings, but I got a stay and no charges came from any of the accusations. Back to today. When my grandma died, she had a strong will in place. She left my dad $100. That was the minimum she could leave him so he couldn't sue for the rest, which she gave to me. I got grandma's house, which was my dad's childhood family home. I got the rest of her money, her and grandpa's sentimental possessions, and she had some investments too. My dad tried to go after it, saying as her only child he should get everything, but her will stopped it. She left nothing to his wife or her kids. So then they started contacting me, at first through lawyers and then on socials, saying I should be dividing it evenly and giving Dad what he deserves, then shaming me for accepting it when she excluded my siblings. My dad even tried coming to the house to talk, and when he started to shame me for accepting it when she disrespected our family, I told him she was right, and they were all monsters, and they didn't deserve anything. The will's her last and most powerful act of protection. That $100 isn't an inheritance, it's a legal barb. It's her saying, I see you, I name you, and you get the absolute minimum my conscience and the law allow. Everything else, the house, the money, the sentimental items, isn't just a gift to you, it's a deliberate, documented transfer of safety, stability, and legacy to the one person who valued her love over their cruelty. She didn't just leave you assets, she left you a fortress. And our second story. He called me schoolboy for being in college, so when he demanded I do inventory, I did it in Roman numerals. The police escorted him out the next day. During my last year of college, I picked up a job on the production crew of a small manufacturing company. It was one of those places where everyone wore multiple hats. The machines were older than half the staff, and the entire operation revolved around a single proprietary process invented by the owner. The job itself wasn't terrible, loud, repetitive, and exhausting, but it paid the bills and worked around my class schedule. The real problem was the production team leader, a guy I'll call Dirk. Dirk had the kind of presence that filled a room before he even spoke. He was around 6'4", built like he'd been carved out of spare prison yard concrete, and had a face tattoo that made it very clear he wanted people to feel uncomfortable. He leaned into intimidation like it was a hobby. He'd crowd people's personal space, stare too long, crack his knuckles for effect. He wore a chain wallet and rotated through Monster Energy hats like it was a uniform requirement. He also had a habit of telling stories that made everyone quietly wonder how he'd never been arrested for something very serious. Dirk's favorite pastime, though, was picking on me. From day one, he latched onto the fact that I was in college. He called me schoolboy every chance he got, usually with a sneer. "How's school, schoolboy?" he'd say, loud enough for the whole warehouse to hear. "Still letting professors tell you how to think?" This would usually be followed by a rant about how education was a scam, smart people were actually stupid, and only idiots wasted time in classrooms instead of learning real skills. He had a whole routine, and he never got tired of performing it. The rest of the crew hated him, all 8 of them. Everyone knew he was a problem, but no one could get rid of him. The owner of the company was a genuinely brilliant mechanical engineer, the kind of guy who could design complex machinery in his head, but he was hopeless when it came to managing people. Dirk figured this out early and used it to his advantage. Anytime the owner tried to push back, Dirk would loom, swear, and subtly threaten until the conversation ended. So Dirk stayed, and everyone else just endured him. Within my first month, Dirk decided that inventory was now my responsibility. Not just helping with it, doing all of it. Inventory was supposed to be a 3-person job, but he handed me a clipboard and told me to figure it out. Every 2 weeks, I'd stay late, sometimes past midnight, counting raw materials and finished product by myself in a silent warehouse. It sucked, but I was getting overtime, and honestly, being alone in the building was preferable to being around Dirk. 6 months later, I graduated. Almost immediately after, I was promoted out of the warehouse and into the product design office. It was exactly where I wanted to be from the start. Clean, quiet, and full of people who spoke in complete sentences. I finally thought I was free of Dirk. That illusion lasted 3 days. Near the end of my 3rd day in the office, Dirk stuck his head through the door like a bad omen. "You taking inventory tonight?" he said, not asking. I looked up from the desk and replied, "I don't work in the warehouse anymore." He stepped closer, filling the doorway, eyes locked on mine. "You do what I tell you," he growled, leaning in until I could smell energy drink on his breath. He started cursing, making it very clear he wanted me intimidated into compliance. I paused, glanced around at my new coworkers, and then nodded. "Fine," I said. "I'll do it." What Dirk didn't realize was that I had just decided to stop playing nice. This is the turning point. You realize you no longer had to endure him in your daily work environment? Your promotion gave you a buffer of safety he couldn't easily reach. That subtle glance at your new coworkers was the realization that you were now in a different world with different witnesses. You agreed not out of fear, but because you knew you could control the outcome now. That night, I took inventory exactly as instructed, but I recorded everything in Roman numerals. Every count, every item, perfectly accurate, meticulously neat, and completely unreadable to someone with Dirk's level of literacy. I figured worst case, he'd get confused and ask someone else to translate. Best case, he'd embarrass himself. I wasn't there when he found the clipboard. When I walked into work the next morning, the warehouse looked like a tornado had passed through. Shelves were emptied, boxes ripped open, materials scattered everywhere. 2 police officers were standing near the entrance talking to the owner. I learned later that Dirk had found the inventory sheet, completely lost his mind, and started throwing product off the shelves while screaming about smart butt college punks. Someone called the cops. Dirk didn't get arrested, but he was escorted out peacefully, which apparently involved a lot of yelling and one officer reminding him to keep his hands where they could be seen. He was fired on the spot and issued a legal notice barring him from the building and from contacting any employees. The change was immediate. A new production lead was promoted within a week, and suddenly everything ran smoother. Machines operated faster, product quality improved, the mysterious supply shortages we'd been dealing with vanished overnight. Turns out they were never shortages at all, just Dirk being lazy, careless, and bad at his job. As for inventory, it went back to being a 3-person task, done during regular hours in plain old Arabic numerals. Funny how efficient things get when the biggest obstacle is finally removed. The aftermath proves the whole story. The entire crew's life improved, and the company's efficiency jumped because you removed the one person who was only there to project power, not to do the job. The Roman numerals were just the final elegant nudge that made him show his true, unhinged self in front of the one person who could fire him, the owner, with police as witnesses. You didn't just outsmart him, you exposed him as the actual source of the company's problems. And our last story. He lost his license and his shop after trying to steal my mom's vintage truck. There used to be a small mechanic shop a few blocks from where I grew up, run by a guy I'll call Paul. It was one of those places everyone in the neighborhood swore by. No flashy sign, no fancy waiting area, just a couple of bays, a cluttered office, and a reputation built almost entirely on word of mouth. My mom had been taking her cars there for as long as I could remember, easily 15 years. Oil changes, repairs, inspections, you name it. By the time this story happened, Paul wasn't just the mechanic, he was basically a family friend. I was 17 and desperately hunting for my first car. I didn't need anything fancy, just something that ran and wouldn't strand me halfway to school. When Paul heard I was looking, he casually mentioned he had a car sitting on his lot that had been there forever. One afternoon, he told my mom, "Honestly, if your kid wants it, I'll just give it to him. It's been collecting dust anyway." That kind of generosity felt unreal, and at the time, we took it as another sign that Paul was a solid guy. Around that same time, my mom decided to finally fix up her 1989 Nissan hardbody pickup. That truck had been sitting for about a year because life kept getting in the way, but anyone who knows those old hardbodies knows they're tanks. Reliable, simple, and somehow immortal. She'd owned it since 1991, and even with high mileage, it was still worth real money. She brought it into Paul's shop, trusting him like she always had. At first, everything seemed normal. A week passed, then 2. When my mom asked about the truck, Paul would say things like, "I'm slammed right now," or "I'm waiting on parts," or "I'll get to it next week, I promise." When I asked about the car he'd offered me, the answer was always some version of, "It's been sitting too long. Needs a bit of work before I can hand it over." Fair enough. He was giving me a car for free. I wasn't about to nag him. Weeks turned into months. November rolled into December, then January. The excuses stayed the same, but the timelines never materialized. My mom started checking in more frequently, about once a week. Each time, Paul sounded confident and reassuring. Almost done, just one more thing. You know how it goes. Because of his reputation and our long history with him, we kept giving him the benefit of the doubt. By February, my patience was gone. I'd already accepted that I was never getting that free car, but what really bothered me was my mom's truck. It had been sitting on his lot for months with no real explanation. Something felt off. So I did what any anxious 17-year-old with internet access does. I started researching how to file a complaint against a mechanic. That's when I found the Bureau of Automotive Repair. In California, they oversee and license auto repair shops. To file a complaint, you need the shop's license number. I looked it up, and there it was. Paul's license had expired the previous September. I stared at the screen for a long time, rereading it to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding something. He wasn't just behind on paperwork, he was operating illegally. At the moment, a lot of his behavior suddenly made sense, and my fear turned into anger. That one piece of public information changed everything. The expired license was the missing puzzle piece. It turned vague suspicion into concrete understanding. His stalling wasn't incompetence, it was a symptom of an operation that had already gone off the rails. It gave you the leverage you needed to move from frustrated customer to someone who could actually fight back. I'm not confrontational by nature. When I get worked up, my voice shakes, my chest tightens, and my anxiety goes through the roof. But I marched into that shop anyway. I was 17, furious, and shaking like a leaf. I demanded to know why my mom's truck had been sitting there for months and when she was getting it back. Paul brushed me off, barely looking up, muttering something about being busy. That's when I snapped. My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. I told him he'd had the truck long enough and that we were done waiting. As I turned to leave, I tossed out one last line. Have fun explaining all this to the Bureau of Automotive Repair when they find out you don't have a license. Then I walked out and immediately reported him. Within days, my mom was contacted by the investigator assigned to the case. They asked for timelines, invoices, communications, everything. My mom cooperated fully, and for the first time in months, things actually started moving. A couple of weeks later, we were told to go pick up the truck. Walking back into that shop was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life. Paul barely spoke. My mom paid for the minimal work that had actually been done, and I stood behind her, arms crossed, trying to look braver than I felt. We got the keys, started the truck, and drove away without another word. A few months later, I noticed the shop was closed, the lights were off, the bays empty. Not long after that, his business was officially listed as shut down. Years later, I found the citation on the BAR's website that lined up perfectly with what we'd experienced. Looking back, my mom and I are convinced he was trying to steal that truck, a 1989 hardbody with a single owner, original engine, and high mileage that still runs is gold to the right buyer. Even now, with over 250,000 miles on it, people still offer her cash on the spot when they see it parked somewhere. Paul gambled on the wrong family staying quiet. Instead, he lost his shop, his license, and whatever reputation he thought would protect him. And that truck? Still running. All three stories show the power of standing your ground against bullies, liars, and manipulators. The inheritance story is about justice from beyond the grave. The mechanic story proves that a little research can dismantle a criminal's entire operation. But story 2 wins for its clever, controlled escalation. By using Roman numerals, the narrator didn't just refuse to be bullied, he turned the bully's own aggression into the tool of his downfall, exposing him as incompetent and unhinged in front of the owner and the police. It wasn't just revenge, it was strategic demolition. Vote in the comments, which story handled it best, 1, 2, or 3? Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.